Good morning and welcome everyone. Before going any further, just acknowledging that we're all gathered online, but coming from various Aboriginal land here in Mianjin, Brisbane, and Turrbal Yagara land, and pay my respect to elders past and present, and thank them for the wisdom and for them allowing me to walk on this land, and hopefully in everything we do and say, we can bring some of the learnings from this amazing ancient culture into our daily lives. And welcome everyone. Very excited about the session today. We got a couple of very special guests coming to us from Sydney, Dr. Fran Gale and Dr. Michel Edenborough, both from the Western Sydney University, I should say. I basically was looking at various papers online around youth issues a little while ago, and I came across a paper that had written a few years ago, but I thought that its currency has not gone away, and it was a very interesting paper. And so basically got in touch with them, and they very kindly have accepted to join us today and lead our discussion, which would be, I guess they will talk about the research that they did, which was a comparative analysis of, I think, 3 youth participatory action research projects that they did in various settings. I might leave it to Fran and Michel to introduce themselves in a second, but just quickly, because we're such a small numbers, I thought it'd be good also if we can just go around and briefly introduce ourselves and make this a little bit more intimate. So if I can go around, or I'll nominate somebody and then you can nominate the other person. So I'll start with Phil to my left. Phil.
Yeah, my name's Phil Dodds. I'm a youth worker at Sisters Inside in Brisbane. I've been here for 8 years. I've worked around the criminal justice system for the last 24 years. I have a social work degree. And I've been a youth worker for 30 years. 30 years this year I've been a youth worker. That'll do. I'll nominate Sherry.
Good on mute myself. G'day, my name is Cherry. I have 10 years experience working in the education sector, but I've left in the last 12 months to work in youth mental health for Headspace Rockhampton.
And
I will nominate Jen.
Thanks, Sherry. I'm Jen Kagan, and I'm one of the co-facilitators of this community of practice, and I'm from QUT, been a lecturer there for 23 years in social work and human services. Prior to that, I was a youth housing worker for a long time. So that's me, and I'll nominate Rachel.
Which Rachel? There's 4 or 5.
Rachel. Rachel with, oh yeah, right. Another one's Rachel with the video on.
Hi everyone, my name is Rachel. I'm sitting in today from Butcherland, so up Harvey Bay Way, not far from Rockhampton actually. I was working for a company in Brisbane as a trainer and assessor because my vocational background is youth work. So I tend to work in the youth residential setting when I'm working with young people. I started off in New Zealand in alcohol and drug therapeutic communities. And then as I've come to Australia, those residential settings is where I've kind of found myself, just general. Well, when I say general, obviously it's a balloon of complexity, but working with those young people. Thank you for being here today as well. I participated last year and thoroughly loved it. So I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. I nominate Brendan.
Hi everybody. I'm from the Sunshine Coast. Currently not working in the sector, but wanted to network as much as possible before I go head on in there, and I'm glad this group exists, and I get to learn more with you guys as much as I learn, and look forward to this meeting. I'll nominate Michelle.
So, good morning. As you heard from C of Ash, I'm a lecturer in the School of Social Sciences at Western Sydney University, teaching into the social work program, social work and communities programs, and I'm coordinator for community and social action and that subject and family violence policy and practice. My research interests focus on working with inclusive communities, particularly for children and young people from diverse backgrounds, working towards social justice and social change. And so I might nominate the other one of the other Rachels, Rachel Broom.
Rachel Broom has written that she has trouble with sound and mic, so she might not be able to speak. There was one thing, and also Cherie, who has got her sound and video off because she's nursing a sick child.
So perhaps the other Rachel, which I can't see on the screen, did she?
I think they've gone.
Okay.
We've lost one person.
I think that, yeah.
Maybe then I'll nominate Sean.
Hi everyone, I'm Sean. I'm a senior outreach worker at AROS. We are a transition from care service for young people with intellectual and cognitive disabilities. So I've been in this role for about 4 years now. Is there anyone left who has not introduced themselves yet?
Fran?
T. Brindle, who's
Brindle?
T? Whoever T. Brindle is.
T. Brindle, yeah.
Sorry, is that Trudy? Is that me?
Trudy.
Apologies,
Trudy.
everyone. My name is Trudy. I am the Specialist Service Coordinator for the Community Youth Response and Diversion Program, which is a program run by Youth Justice in Queensland. So my role is to coordinate service responses for young people before they touch youth justice, and I connect and collaborate with various services and agencies, both government and non-government, to create and I guess service responses for those young people. And I actually work really closely with Rachel Broom, who's having microphone issues. Rachel is the Queensland Education Court Liaison Officer, so works with young people in the court space to try and support them to re-engage in education or other learning options.
That's great. Yeah.
And Fran's the last one, I think.
Hello, I think you've probably read a bit about us from the brochure, but I'm senior lecturer in the social work program, primarily in the social work program. A lot of my work, I have been a practicing social worker and worked with young people, and a lot of my research work is around, as much as possible, youth-led change, social change. I work with a group called Together for Humanity. I do research for that group, which involves young people being able to deal with racism and bullying, particularly cultural bullying in schools. And Michel has joined me in that project as well. And that's been going on for a couple of years now. I'm on Gadigal land, just to let you know that.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, everyone. Small, intimate group, but it will make the session even more interesting. So I guess without further ado, I'll pass it on to Fran and Michel to take us through the discussion. And just as Fran mentioned, every half an hour, I'm going to just get everyone to stand up, just briefly walk around for 15 seconds or so, just stretch your back, and then we also, after about an hour, we'll have a 5-minute break. So that's a toilet break, cup of tea, and we'll have the second half of the session. Sorry, back to you, Fran and Michel.
I'll share the slides.
That'd be great. I can see Rachel's cat in the background. We just exited ours, Rachel. They're show-offs, aren't they? When you're on Zoom, they want to come in and be part of it.
Yes, I'm juggling 3 dogs, including my son's puppy running around. So hopefully that won't.
Another puppy.
We are inclusive.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. This is just the introductory slide. So basically, we were aiming here for all 3 of these projects to be led by young people. So we gave up as much power as we possibly could within the constraints of working with the funding authority and ethics and so on to the young people. Before we start, I just want to acknowledge the work of the late Professor Natalie Bolzan. Natalie worked tirelessly to challenge the hidden processes that marginalise young people. And it was Natalie and I who undertook these projects together. We had the courage of them, the projects that Michel and I will discuss today. Michel worked with us on a different youth project with Blacktown Local Council, and she kindly came on board and wrote these projects up with me, which was the paper that C of Ash came across. So just to start, this is just a very brief outline of the 3 cases that we're going to focus on today. This work was funded by the Australian Research Council. That was an ARC grant. So the first project was nested within a government agency, and it was set in northern New South Wales. It was rural, in a rural community. Just to mention to you, this was the most successful of the 3 projects in terms of what the young people wanted to achieve. The problem here, as it was described to us, was there was conflict and tension between Indigenous young men and the community, the local farmers in particular. The problem, as the young men described it to us, was that no one respected young black fellas. And what we did here was we firstly employed a trusted youth worker from the community. The young men were asked what change they wanted in the community and how they wanted to see that change happen. They were silent for weeks, and the youth worker felt pressured, not by us, to suggest some activities eventually. And he organised with the young people to go bush with the elders. But the elders turned up and the young people did not. There followed months of waiting, and despite feeling a bit anxious, and we did because we had constraints around having to do things in a certain time related to the funds, we stood by our approach of just sitting with the young men, establishing trust and listening. And that was tough because at one point we lost about 5 people from the group to what they called the big house, which, you know, was the prison. And for them, that was just like a rite of passage. So there were various external pressures, but, you know, it turned out very well. They eventually came up with what turned out to be a brilliant proposal. They said they wanted to work with and train working dogs. And when they first said that, we wondered how that would be an intervention, but the amazing element was that a number of farmers had dogs they wanted trained. And after negotiation, they lent their dogs to the Indigenous young men to train, and we did actually employ a trainer as well to teach training to the dogs. We would never have thought of this intervention ourselves in this situation. So that's the first project. The second one we've called Steel Town. This was led by homeless, unemployed young people. It was nested in a refuge, a homeless young people's refuge. And it was in regional New South Wales, so not rural, but out of the city in a regional town. The young people in this engaged in this project wanted to challenge what they experienced as prejudiced and discriminatory behaviours towards homeless young people. And this had been sparked by one of the young girls who was pregnant, and she was on the streets and she was spat at and she was sworn at by people in this community. And obviously that was a pretty horrible experience. And she was discussing this in the group. So the group became committed to producing a magazine, which was what they thought they wanted to do for other homeless people, which would provide the sort of information that would be important to them, young people, but also for people who not only lived on the streets, but for providing the broader community with insight into the challenges they faced as homeless young people. All of these young people had left school early. Not that there was a lot. There were only about maybe 8 mainly in this group consistently. And they had inconsistent work and education patterns. And so they would need to develop creative responses, which could work for them in order to realise their goal. And we'll talk more about how this happened and so on down the track. The third group, and this was the least successful of all the groups. This was led by culturally and linguistically diverse young women in metropolitan New South Wales, in fact, in Sydney. And this project was nested within a multicultural youth centre. A group formed around young women who were experiencing mental health issues. They wanted to reduce stigma for young people experiencing mental illness. And they made a number of suggestions, which led to them selecting, they wanted to actually write about, which was interesting, and share their mental illness experience. But a key issue here was that the managers of the centre wanted to set the agenda. And that came up as quite a big issue, actually, in terms of them achieving their goals. So that's just a very brief introduction overview to the 3 projects, and we will go into them in more detail a little bit later. But right now, Michelle, it's over to you.
Okay, I'm just going to squish all your lovely faces because I can't see the slide. Just when I tried to squish it, it just actually went to covering the whole slide. Sorry. Little technical issue. Okay, so here you can see participatory action research in the 3 New South Wales practice contexts, and just giving you that demographic information. So as Fran said, it was the Pause Up group were in a rural location, and that was predominantly Anglo community, with Indigenous people mainly living on the outskirts of town in what was once a mission where Indigenous people were formerly segregated during white colonisation. The Indigenous young men varied in numbers from 20 to 58 in the participation, and as Fran said, they varied in coming and participating, but the core group was around 20. They met bi-weekly over 18 to 24 months and continued to meet up after the project completion. So there was some sustainability there, and they were recruited through the existing youth networks and word of mouth. And the hosting organisation for that group was a rural branch of the New South Wales State Government Department, hosting this project in their rural community. For the Steeltown group, as Fran said, that was a socio-economically disadvantaged regional town with higher than average unemployment rates. Young women and men varied in number from 3 to 6. The core group was 3, and they met weekly over 18 to 24 months. They were recruited through the local homeless persons organisation. The young co-researchers identified community discrimination against the homelessness, unemployed young people as the issue that concerned them. I think we already covered that. And yes, we already talked about them choosing a magazine aiming to dismantle their prejudice. So the regional non-government organisation was well respected and had established links in the community. And for the freelance group in Sydney, The young women varied in number from 2 to 6, with a core group of 2 passionate women who were very committed, who met weekly over 12 to 14 months, and they were recruited through a multicultural community organisation. And they wanted to address that stigma that they experienced with mental illness. And that they were supported by a metropolitan non-government organisation with imminent funding review. So that imminent funding review really impacted the experiences of that project. And just to move on to actually how the study was conducted, empowering young people to make social change in their community. These 3 projects in the diverse areas of New South Wales, the research was approved by Western Sydney University Human Ethics Committee. And basically, it was a youth-directed approach. The young people were given as much control as possible within the limits of academic research funding and the ethics guidelines. Youth workers played a significant role. Each project had a youth worker who used critical social work principles. These workers listened to the young people's concerns and helped them achieve their goals for change. As mentioned, the project ran for between 12 and 24 months. And each of the organisations that supported the projects had policies of empowering young people. The co-researchers were young people aged 16 to 21 years, and they participated and met weekly or bi-weekly. The research method used was a model called self-directed group work, where the young people and youth workers, shared power equally. This method is part of participatory action research, which focuses on social activism and community transformation. The data collected by researchers was collected through interviews, observation, field notes, and media reports. The analysis, the researchers looked for common themes and checked their findings with the young participants to make sure that they understood correctly what their experiences were. They also reflected on the process and relationships to see what helped or hindered the young people's agency. So the study aimed to show how young people can be supported to lead social change within their communities. So basically now I've lost all the, there you are, back again. So now we've got an opportunity to just talk through that section and open up with others what sort of opportunities or enablers you've found to promote youth agency and youth-directed change. See if I can change my view to everyone, gallery view. So don't be shy. Anybody have any thoughts they'd like to share? Rachel, please pipe in. I'm sorry, you're on the screen really tiny for me, so I did see your hand up, but in case I missed somebody that had their hand up, sorry.
No, you're fine. It's probably on the smaller end of the scale, but time frame. So young people don't wake up. They've got a different body clock to us. So we would tend to be up and going at 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning, but a young person's probably still arguing about mum wanting to open the curtains, and throw open the door, particularly if they're in that space where they're interrupted in their learning journey. They've got a different type of, social interaction. So maybe just one of the opportunities that I used to think about when I wanted to enable a young person to potentially attend appointments that would benefit them, they're not ones that they have to go to. So they're not youth justice or they're not their child safety worker, but what time of the day do you feel would work for you was one of the ways that I used to try and enable their participation, I suppose. I'm not too sure if that's the kind of place you wanted to start it, but that's just, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Mr. Pickles is out of control.
Oh, good on Mr. Pickles.
Gosh.
I think that's a really important point.
Yeah, well, it always felt more productive to not have my time frame be the template for the young person's action. I mean, all I need to do is be at work on time. The rest of the shift should feel like the young person's decision making is at the center of it, and we're at all possible within legislation and procedures, of course, and policy.
That's a great example, Rachel. And did you find it was effective?
Time? Yeah, I think we did discuss this a little bit last year, and it's that interesting, we imagine what a home will be like for a young person when they're in residential care, but in reality, 60% of that time, the young person doesn't feel at home. They live there, they exist there, they know the worker, they hate the worker, they have to go to school, they have to go to the social worker, they have to go doctor. But there's very few windows where you can break into the young person's imagination, but grounded in reality of what my day looks like for working with them, not for the organization's case notes, if that makes sense. There was, success looked like, yeah, let's do this, let's drive to this thing on the other side of town. Let's not go to the morning session, let's go to the afternoon session. Cool, that's fine by me. So success wasn't always them getting out of the car when we got there. Success was almost about accepting that they wanted to engage and they felt comfortable and came to a middle ground with me, for example. That would probably, those felt like the wins for me. It wasn't necessarily pushing them to get out of the car if their anxiety wasn't productive. We couldn't have a safe space to tease that anxiety apart. But generally, I always felt the young person engaged better or more relaxed if they had that opportunity to direct elements of it. I think we use the word control in terms of timeframes, but direct was a better way to participate with actions around stuff like that. Because sometimes it is quite hard to get young people to leave the house. So there's all that stuff locked in their minds, But yeah, time was always something that shouldn't have been rushed where possible, and should have, where possible, been the young person's to determine what we do. Felt successful. I got swore at less on those days and more so as their peer. G'day B, how you going? We don't call me B, we call me Rach. So that's a kind of, not having delved into that research part, probably just what a young person's day-to-day life looks like if you're trying to, let youth lead it safely. Well, what they determine is safe and what I determined is safe would invariably two different things or slightly off the same page. That cat.
Can I just mention, I know the discussion is very interesting. We are at that half an hour point if you're wanting to have a quick stretch.
And I think, Sherry, you had your hand up too, so we'll definitely come back to that.
Yeah, so brief 30 seconds, just get up, have a stretch, walk around the room, do your back a big favor. We'll start very shortly.
What was that dancing method you mentioned, Jan?
Okay, everyone, come back now.
Don't go.
Um,
Thank you, Rachel. Fran, who did you say had their hand up next?
Cherry.
It's
Cherry.
just
Oh,
me.
sorry. Thank you, Cherry.
I just wanted to build on what Rachel was saying in terms of time. I think the other thing that fits into that in terms of enabling an opportunity is, I guess, kind of a catchphrase that we have here at Headspace is to meet the young people where they are at. And something to build on that is with whom they are with. So I think that's something that has been quite successful in a lot of the advocacy programs that we've tried to run here is if you are tapping into pre-existing social groups or social spaces, so we have afternoon groups here at Headspace, if the young people feel like they have a community, whether that's a community of like interests, a found family. So one of ours is our rainbow space for LGBTQIA plus youth. I feel that that helps to keep them accountable if they are using these opportunities for social interactions with like-minded peers as well. So it's not just about enabling a person or a young person as an individual, but enabling a group of young people that I think is most effective.
Great point. Thanks, Cherry.
Yeah, I think the second question there around barriers that you find that impede that stuff. I think a couple, and you even mentioned the management on one of the projects was quite resistant to the young women doing what they wanted to do. I think that can be a barrier. If you don't have good management, they will put barriers up every day.
Yeah.
I think the other big barrier there is funding constraints.
Yes.
Getting money to run good projects is really difficult. Within the existing funding, you don't have a lot of money to spend to do other things like that.
Yeah.
That can be a real barrier, and I don't know what the answer is. I mean, sweet talk management or challenge management, absolutely. I would challenge management on that sort of stuff, and I think management need to be challenged at times. But yeah, there's no easy answer, is there?
No, as you'll hear in one of our projects. Yeah. But they are both really important barriers that we we'll actually discuss a little bit more a little bit later. Thank you.
So the other question, I guess, coming in is this underpinning assumption around adultism in relation to youth and trusting young people to have that strength and ability to actually lead their own decision making.
I remember a long time ago, I was involved in a project in Victoria, country Victoria, and it was a self-directed program by young people, and there was a real tension for the adults in the space who were all critical youth workers, like really believed in youth activism, but just that kind of, at what point are we throwing young people to the wolves without the scaffolding that might help them lead a group, make decisions, engage in conflict resolution, like all of that kind of stuff. You know, and so to what extent do we back off and just let it happen, or kind of come in and be participants with them in teaching them that kind of stuff? It was a really interesting tension that sometimes was resolved well and sometimes felt like it wasn't resolved well, you know, in ways that then young people were a bit set up to fail. Because they didn't have the skills, you know. I mean, those skills are learned, you know, and they didn't have the skills. This was a group of homeless young people. So there were some successes, but there was also some really important lessons for, you know, me at the time as a youth worker who was interested in engaging young people in activism. Yeah.
What were those lessons, Jen? Thinking back.
Around primarily it was around that it's okay to support young people, you know, and to go, actually, I do know something about this, and we can work together and build those skills together, and that. So it's that kind of standing with, not walking in front of, you know, but that's standing with someone, but not standing so far behind that you're setting them up to fail.
Yeah, that's shared power.
You know, so yeah. And that's then what I've kind of taken into then, you know, future work from there, is that it really is about that standing with people and going, okay, I know some stuff about this, so, you know, but you know some stuff about that, so let's bring all of that knowledge together, you know, because let's face it, young people are experts in a whole bunch of stuff that I know bugger all about, you know. And you know, and particularly, you know, for those young people, it was in the context of what's it like being a young person who's being arrested by police all the time and being, you know, hassled, and, you know, I don't know about that. I don't have a lived experience of that. They got to teach me about that stuff, you know. And I might have been able to teach them about conflict resolution in the group process, or, you know, how to be an effective leader in a group, you know, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
I think, Jen, you make a really good point in that it's that having those conversations with the young, so you're negotiating with them.
Yeah. And I think that's you know, not to take up too much space, but, you know, but I think that's that bit about adultism, isn't it? It's about going, you know, so often as adults, you know, young people are, it's like people that should be talked to, not with, and, you know, like, and they're not valued, and so it's about kind of stepping back from those places, and young people respond because that's the shit they get from everyone else, you know. And when you kind of disrupt that, then they go, okay, you know, I'll call you Rachel today instead of B, you know, like, you know, like they respond well. Yeah.
So, Jen, the approach that we took with these projects was that the youth worker was a resource for the young people. So it was that actually tapping into that fine line that you're talking about there, trying to walk that fine line. And as Michel said, being in a collaborative relationship where, but that young people, their views are seen as they're experts in what they're experts in. Yeah. It's great. Sounds great.
Yeah. I'd like to comment too on that one, if I could.
Of course.
I think what we see is an absolute hypocrisy from all level of government when it comes to young people. We see young people have to pay full fares on public transport from age of 15. They have to pay full fares everywhere. They have to pay adult prices when they go to the cinema, stuff like that. Yet they're not old enough to get a full youth allowance, to get a full unemployment benefit until they're 22. We have a youth justice system where in Queensland at the moment, we've got the LNP bashing on the law and order again. Do the crime, do the time. We're going to sentence young people to adult prison sentences if they commit a crime. You know what I mean? And if government tells young people, oh, you're like an adult, you get treated like an adult in some ways, but in other ways you won't. You're still a young person who has no value in our society. And I think that's a really big issue for young people. Young homeless people who get an $200 less than an adult who's homeless. Still cost them the same to rent a bloody house. It still costs them the same for food. It still costs them the same for fares because they have to pay adult fares. But we won't give you enough income support to survive. So committing crime to survive and going to jail and getting stuck in that cycle. And I think government's got a lot to answer for around young people being treated as if they are adults when they're not.
Yeah, totally agree, Phil. I think one of the big examples there too is that young people can join the Defence Force at 16, but they can't vote. No, they don't get a say in policies, and
So John Howard has a lot to answer for.
Agree. Yeah.
Did anyone else have any thoughts on their experiences around adultism? Maybe you might have some examples around how to identify tokenism and some of the ways that you might respond to that when you feel like that's happening.
I'd just like to say, if I identify tokenism from any adult, I challenge them on it immediately. I think that's the only way to deal with it. And explain why you think it's tokenistic, why they're being tokenistic, and mayhaps they will change their attitudes.
Michel, Carrie has got a hand up, sorry.
Yeah, I think that the easiest way, I guess, to identify tokenism is really asking if the young people are at the center of the decision making. I think that's your greatest defense against it. And if you feel like organizations or actions that are supposed to be representing youth aren't doing that, I think the first question is asking at what point in the decision-making process the young people were involved.
Yeah, totally agree.
That's very succinct, Cherry. Thank you. Well, thank you for having a little break to discuss that. Let's move the... Okay, so here is some of the challenges and successes and challenges for, as Fran said, the Pause Up group. That was the most successful group.
Yes, I have to say this was one of our favourites. But you'll remember that the Indigenous young men raised their concern that young black fellas weren't respected in the wider community, and that involved experience of a disconnect between themselves and the wider local community. And they were often seen as a problem and talked about as that in those terms, for example, by the school and by the justice system. Some of the challenges, in fact, included a couple of things that Phil raised, and that others here have also spoken about. So one was that the young people at first wanted to please the youth worker in that kind of adultist kind of way, you know, what do you want us to do? And it took a while, and that was partly where that going bush with elders, you know, that's often seen to be a thing to do, and that's partly how that came up. And of course, in fact, they showed that they didn't really want that because actually no one turned up. The elders turned up, but they didn't turn up. So we waited a couple of months, and there was some tension around that because of time, the time pressures that you know that you have already talked about. And but as we said, their proposal of working and training with working dogs was just perfect for the problem of their context, their community. One of the other challenges was this widespread discrimination about these young people in the community. And we had a striking example of that at the young men's first dog jumping show. They had only just started out, and this was their very first one. And they won the dog jump at the first local show in their community. But while they were on the platform being presented with the prize, the police actually brought up drug sniffer dogs, treating them as suspects. Now, this was only a few years ago, really, that this happened. Didn't do it to any of the other groups, but did it to this particular group. There was an interesting response. Nat and I thought we would have to travel up to this community and go through what this project was about again, but it was the public, members of the community, who then actually wrote to the newspaper and complained. They wrote to the police and they complained about this. So there was quite a bit of protest, and the police in their defense said, but, you know, the community always wants us to come down hard on these kids. But something changed there in that public space, because this was such a public project that the young people had chosen. It revealed to the community the functioning of this dynamic of marginality. And so people started to get on board. We just saw a change happen at that point where we didn't have to go up there in the end. This was actually challenged by the community who witnessed it, who thought, you know, who said, look, they're trying to do something good. This was, you know, in the letters to the newspaper at the time. So successes is defined by the young men themselves. They actually valued being authors of their own solution and having agency to carry that out. And they spoke about the importance of having the opportunity to try and fix what they thought were issues in the community. And one said, you know, you've given us a chance to do something ourselves. An Indigenous youth worker commented that she believed the dog jumping project chosen by the young people was effective because it had cultural resonance for that group. It drew on long established group skills. She said, our mob understands dogs. We've been around dogs for a long time. The young men made the key decisions around the project, whether these were in more public contexts like training, jumping activities, what shows they'd go to, what shows they'd put on, and to more private contexts in the group. So with the youth worker, they were asked, what rules do you want to have in this group? What rules about behaviour? And if they're broken, what do you want to do about it? And so they had the youth workers' support in bringing these to the attention of anyone who might break the rules agreed on, so taking drugs, and, alcohol and so on. The second thing that they commented on was not being labelled or categorised, and they actually valued that this wasn't intervention by the welfare. They didn't see it in that way. It cast them as authors of their own solutions rather than victims. As one said, it isn't the welfare, you know, it's doing ordinary shit and stuff, which was, you know, his comment when we asked him what he liked about working with the dogs. They didn't want labels such as disadvantaged or welfare attached to them. This was initially a little bit of a problem as we saw it with the media, because the media liked this contrast. They start one article we saw very early on started as breaking into houses, ... jumping dogs. You know, and we spoke, that was local media, so we actually spoke to them, Nat and I spoke to them about that. But that actually changed over time as well. The families of these young men were very skeptical at first. I think they saw it as a sort of do-gooder thing, but they actually then came on board. In fact, one young man proudly said that his mum had bought the newspaper because his picture was in it, and she didn't normally buy the newspaper. The credit union came on board and gave the young men a free account, and the liaison worker from the credit union said, the families of the team members are highly supportive of the program. They do not now consider it to be some do-gooder scheme because they're treated with respect by the coordinator. That was actually the local youth worker on the ground, and they can genuinely see the positive impact the program's having on their kids' lives. It brought about increased connectedness in the community, and the community actually responded to that. So by its nature, the Young People's Project of dog jumping took place in public arenas. The guys ended up doing things like going to nursing homes to visit farmers who missed their working dogs, you know, these big chunky working dogs. They did a lot of really good stuff. They were invited by a community up around Alice Springs to help bring the dogs up to round up brumbies. This was an Indigenous community up there. They got a lot of public attention. They were on Landline, ABC Landline. They were interviewed, and we did not speak for them. We were invited to speak, and we put it over to them. And I would just share this here because it was quite funny. One of them said on the radio that they didn't do houses the night before. They had to get up early to do the dog jumping. And we thought, this is it, we've lost the grant now. But anyway, it didn't happen. It kept on going. So it attracted quite a bit of visibility and increased civic connectedness and the people's responses to. The young men actually ended up at that point in time winning the Australian dog jumping record, and they wound up in the Guinness Book of Records, and they've done many regional shows and wool expos. One of the things that pleased them most, and it was surprising how pleased they were, that farmers would come up and shake their hands in the street. They would say things like, did your mob train those dogs? And the guys would say yes. And they would shake their hands, and they really valued that. Farmers described changing their view to some extent, you know, like they had seen them as lazy, as not wanting to work. And they would say things like, well, they're not lazy. You have to get up really early in the morning to train the dogs. So this narrative about these Indigenous young men began to change in the town, with media getting on board, writing stories too about how proud they were of what the young men were doing. The local state MP discussed the project in Parliament. The local high school began to have Indigenous young people teach the students dog training as part of the high school program. The local TAFE introduced the program into their curriculum and were exploring options to provide the young people with formal recognition for their work in dog training. Many of the young people now attend something called the Ironman Welders program, and they've subsequently formed ag lads to meet the labour needs of the local rural industry. So young people previously marginalised from the community now have a range of links into the community. We used Nancy Fraser's work as an alternate framework to neoliberalism in this project. And Fraser argues that group identities, you know, are not then simplified in ways which encourage separatism and intolerance that form, you know, which actually reinforces marginality. It gave them some hope at a personal level. Some of the young men took up apprenticeships. Others decided to leave the community. They hadn't thought they could leave the community and go to the city. But we don't know much about the long-term durability of the changes which the Young People's Project fostered. It's of interest that the state and some of its institutions, to some extent in this local community, modified their practices. So the police policed in a different way, and the court, actually we had magistrates who allowed young people who weren't supposed to leave town to travel if they were traveling with the dog jumping program. Unfortunately, I have heard that the government has, after having, you know, sung its praises, then took funding away from this, which was rather sad. Yeah, so Michelle, can we have the next slide, please? I'm sorry, the dog that you saw on that previous slide was one of the actual dogs that's jumping. This was the dog that won everything for the boys, and it was so lovely. This dog's name is Zorro. And when each guy had a relationship with an individual dog, but they saw it very collectively. And when we said, would you like to have a turn with Zorro, kind of thing, because Zorro was the big champion, it was like, no. They do, Zorro does it for all of us. There's this really lovely sense of collectivity in that group. So the first question here is, I'm wondering what impacts of neoliberal new public management practices, bit of a mouthful, applying business principles basically to human services organisations, have you come across in your actual work experiences? How have they impacted your work, I guess?
Can I make a comment? I think case management is exactly that. And it was put in 25 years ago now, it's been around 25 years ago, to start controlling what organisations can do. It also implies to young people get told, oh, we're having a case management meeting. That implies to young people don't know what they need. We're the professionals, we'll tell you what to do, because governments want quick turnover.
Yeah.
So, like the Reconnect program, for example, to work with young people before they come homeless or just on homelessness. We're a specialist Reconnect service, so we can have long-term connections with our young people at Sisters Inside, but most Reconnect services have a 3-month window, and then they're supposed to exit that client after 3 months. You're only just getting the relationship built after 3 months, let alone making any significant ingrounds with that young person in them changing their own circumstances. Case management sucks because it's all about professionals taking control of young people. It's an absolutely disgusting process, and I would never work in an organisation again that uses case management. I'm privileged to work in an organisation that doesn't do case management. So yeah.
That's great, Phil. Thank you. There's also a sense there, isn't it, that one size fits all in that situation. No interventions are streamlined.
Yeah, they're all young people. They're all the same. They'll all get the same service.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not the case. Yeah.
No, not at all.
I also think the focus on measurable outcomes is a real barrier to social change. And I remember doing some supervision actually with a youth worker who was working in a employment agency that was located in a youth service, and there was all kinds of strict criteria that had to be the KPIs that had to be met, and it was about this many young people have jobs, or this many young people are job ready, all that kind of stuff. And the young people that this person was working with didn't even imagine that the world of work was for them. Like that's how far down the track they were, and so to get them to the point where they even imagined that one day they might be able to work, that the world of work was something that they could participate in, was a huge win. But she would say to me, like, where's the box for that? Like, I don't have a box to tick that on my data, that I have to report that these young people imagine themselves as workers, that the world of work is for them. They haven't written a resume yet. They haven't got a job, all of that kind of stuff. They haven't done that yet, but they at least are going to, imagine that they might do that one day now. And so that kind of, the neoliberal data collection forms, that kind of stuff. I mean, what we talked about was to build relationships with the funders and tell the stories, like beyond the data form, tell the stories. And that's kind of, how we got around that. And so it was seen as a measure of success in this particular instance. But yeah. outcomes, KPIs, that business crap that we're meant to all engage with now. That, you know, when I started 100 years ago as a youth worker, we didn't talk in business terms. We didn't talk in business terms at all. Now, people work for private companies and have KPIs and they tender for funds, you know, and it's like, when did that all change? I mean, I know when it all changed, you know, but how did we let that happen? Yeah. But that's a bigger story, you know. That's
and young people are consumers now, Jen, aren't they?
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yeah.
And so I don't know if we've mentioned it. Sorry, I've been listening to everything. Sorry to jump in, Jen, but
no, go.
It's the same thing. Like, an organization is granted funding, but it needs to be a program like this. And, you know, and when you're trying to measure how to force your young people into that box so they can have an experience, it damages the whole principles of why our industry exists. Young people are in, you know, vulnerable situations, and it's not a business model, it's a life path. And those 3-month case management contracts we have with young people, it doesn't really respect the fact that it's young people. Sorry, it's not a fully formed thought, but it just tagged on the end of what Jen said. Some of the most frustrating situations I've been in is that we have maybe 6 young people. 2 of them have showed an interest in artwork once because they brought texters and were occupied for 2 hours. Then all of a sudden, all of them have to become involved in this mural project, which has absolutely nothing to do with the bandwidth that they have to be engaged with. And I think that damages their entire connection with any possibilities for well, it can, worst case scenario, close them off from feeling we are genuine when we want to connect. Maybe. Sorry, that was a partial thought there.
Rachel, that's exactly what happened in our 3rd project.
Yeah.
And it was around art.
Yeah. I could have, essentially that's what I thought of when you said that last one fell over. I was like, well, I wonder what happened.
That's what happened.
Yeah.
And part of this, isn't it, is trying to cram as many people in as possible, while giving no more resources. So you get these short-term contracts, and people get the same kind of approach, whether that's suitable or not, appropriate for them or not. And youth workers get really stretched as well, trying to do all this.
Yeah, and it feels so in New Zealand. Late 80s, I think it was, if I remember rightly. Sorry, it was a long time ago that I was at university. All of this, it's kind of a parallel example of the way things kind of fell to pieces in that original, there's no real business model. It's a support service. A lot of the psychiatric services that were supporting people in a public health sector, because inflation destroyed all the available, you know, everything just started to shave off. A whole lot of people that were in community care then got given a balloon of money and were put out into the community, but realistically there wasn't the support there to form relationships in healthy ways with their community. So that's another 20 years of ruptured relationships for adults. And when you look at young people, these business models remind me of short-term acute emergency departments at hospitals. It doesn't feel like it's engaging in that. What does the success of all of our communities look like in the future, and where does it start? Well, it starts with the stories underneath the young people, you know.
Yeah.
I jump in and do a timekeeping thing. Give you a need of a little break. I know the conversation is going well again. It's always feel bad to be the timekeeper, but should we have a 5-minute break just to stretch, get a cup of coffee if you need to go to a bathroom, and continue? So, okay,
Yeah,
let's do that. So it's 11, 13 past, or 14 past 11 will resume. Thank you. And yeah, so we can continue. Fran and Michel, back to you if you're wanting to take us through.
Michelle, are you there? You're on mute. The most commonly said thing to all of us on Zoom. It sounds like we might need to keep going, as we've still got a few more question slides and a few more case studies. So, Michelle, maybe we should go on to the next slide if everyone agrees with that. Okay. This was the least successful of the three groups. Michelle's going to talk about the successes, which were very limited, and I will talk a bit about the challenges.
Yes, so thank you, Fran. And I think as Rachel mentioned, the successes for this group were limited. The young women wanted support to develop their writing skills, to write about their experiences with mental health issues, and they were really passionate about making that happen, despite management's refusal and the youth workers feeling the pressure to conform to the agency's demands. The young women persisted in really trying to write, but they have very little support, so they were basically supporting each other, trying to get that done. While the youth worker really tried to meet both the young woman's and the management's needs by providing a writing resource website and art materials. However, the focus was really on producing art at the request and the pressure from the agency to participate in a festival and produce something that they could use to tick boxes with, as you say. The youth worker continued to support the young women within the constraints imposed by the organisation, despite this pressure, standing beside them in showing them websites and things like that they could engage with that helped their writing development. So the young women developed through this, one of the successes was that these women developed a real critical awareness of their own marginalisation and the limitations of adult support, reflecting on their experiences and voicing their concerns to the youth worker. So they were able to articulate that and challenge what was happening to them. So that was quite impressive.
Thanks, Michelle. I think Michelle's mentioned some of the challenges there too, so I won't go over those so much. But we saw that last, Natalie and I saw that last experience where at one point the service, because they were coming up for imminent funding review, tried to get these young women to find out from other young people coming to the centre what the young people wanted. And the girls just said no. They said, they don't do what they say they're going to do anyway, and they don't listen to us, so we're not going to do this. And that came at the end pretty much of this process, which wasn't terribly successful. They were coming up for a funding review, and the centre had previously had kids at the centre display art at the street festival, and they felt that that gave them demonstrated community relevance of the centre very visibly, and it had worked before, so they really wanted the young women to do art. And what happened here was that basically some of the young women acquiesced, about 2, but the group began to dwindle, extremely dwindle. And of those remaining, one of them made masks about their mental health challenges and discussed it with the youth worker. So that was productive. But The worker had a really difficult time. She tried to balance the wishes of the young women with the pressures from management, and she actually described feeling stymied and not being able to move ahead on anything really. She provided a writing website for the young women, but actually only gave them art materials and ongoing support. We made a number of visits to this centre and discussed the goals of the project, and management agreed, but what they then did was move the group to late afternoon. So the girls couldn't really come because they'd have to travel home in the dark on public transport. And it just really, the group pretty much dissolved. So what the young women put up was not given any serious consideration. They faced really concern about risk aversion and neoliberal concerns that prioritised the aim of meeting the organisation's key performance indicators, as we just talked about, and neoliberal benchmarks above the young people's creative ideas, because their fear was that this might jeopardise funding. So the girls had an approach that they wanted to put into practice for change, but it wasn't even considered at all, really. So these processes not only constrained the youth workers' professional freedom, they reduced the young women's visibility, their viewpoints, their agency, and it reinforced their feelings of marginalisation, which the youth worker did discuss, as Michel pointed out, with them. And it hindered possible innovation for social justice change. So here, even though we emphasised partnership with the young people, with the young people leading, they were treated as less than equal partners. And that prevented recognition of their different approaches to imagining and working for change. And as a result, the spaces for change that the young people tried to create were really actively shut down. It was our least successful project of the three. So Michel, can we move on? So just a few discussion questions here. And I think we talked a little about this previously, but what examples do you have from your practice experience of challenging neoliberal practices? So not just the experience of them, but challenging them. And to what extent did you find the outcome of that challenge was effective? We continued to challenge here, but it didn't lead to much effective change.
I can jump in and tell a little story of, I think Jen was mentioning, how did we allow this whole thing to creep onto the sector, the neoliberal agenda, and also the language of it. I remember clearly when, at the time when they were introducing the language to the sector, the language of business models and outcomes as the way to draw up contracts. At the time, I was challenging it, and at a meeting which was chaired by the person who was not from the right side of the politics, was actually the head of the socialist left of the Labour Party in Queensland, who was a minister at the time and then went on to become the premier. And her response to me was, don't get in the way of the rivers of funding that are going to flood the sector. These were her words after we actually used this language. And everybody basically in the meeting turned at me as being the person that's the dam who's stopping these rivers flooding the sector. And here we are, we've had less funding come to the sector and the sector is all being destroyed. So this neoliberal agenda isn't just from thinking about from a liberal or, the Republican in the US. In US, in England, in Australia, unfortunately, both sides of the governments have really adopted the neoliberal agenda, and it's been crushing to the sector. The way we treat young people in the middle of it is the saddest thing, because once we see our work as similar to business, then we commodify everything, commodify our kind of work. And because the way the traditional youth work as opposed to the way of trying to produce outcomes, is not as profitable. We basically throw away that relationship, that what was actually unique about youth work, which is giving priority as that trusting relationship, which you mentioned before, the youth workers have. Very sad, really.
Very sad.
As you say, only valuing people for the money that they can bring in. Instead of so many other ways we value people.
One of the frustrations that I felt rise up as you were telling that story, so it's not really an answer to your question, it's just something I have to say, is that the lack of success also would have, I imagine, provided an out for the organisation in providing anything else. You know, they would have said, oh, well, we tried to support an art project and no one was interested. You know, and so putting it back on the young people that, well, they didn't participate, they weren't involved, you know, and we put these resources in and we tried to support it. And so therefore we don't need to do that again, you know, and I think that's something that I've just seen happen over and over again, that when something's set up to fail, inevitably it fails. And then it's, well, we gave you the option, you know, and you didn't take it.
Yeah, without recognizing the adultism power.
Yeah, absolutely.
There. Yeah, adult power.
Yeah. Yeah, it was always going to fail. It was set up. Yeah. Yeah.
There were our colleagues in UK, Tony Taylor and a bunch of I guess radical youth workers. They put out they came together under the umbrella of In Defense of Youth Work, and they put an open letter out now almost 2 decades ago, I think it is. And one of the beautiful things that they articulated in that was that youth work historically used to be volatile and voluntary, and was creative and collective. And the last bit was an association of conversations without any guarantees. And I think that sort of summarized so beautifully the way youth work used to be, as opposed to what is now, which is all about definite guarantees, no voluntarily, no creative, no collective, and no conversation. It's very much being talked to.
Yeah, talk to.
Yeah.
Does anyone want to add anything else to this? Or will we move on?
Thinking about disruptors.
Yes, and challenges.
Yeah.
Has anyone tried any particular approaches to challenging neoliberalism?
It's so all-encompassing, isn't it?
It is, but part of the message of these projects is that it's not uniform. It's dominant, but it's not uniform.
No.
And there is some hope there. And in the next project, which maybe we'll move on to, we had a little bit more of a negotiation with the particular NGO, and that can we go back?
Oh, sorry.
And that actually did work. So so basically in this organization, I think, sorry, Michelle, you can talk about the successes there.
Okay, so with the Steeltown group, the successes of the young people in that they decided to produce a magazine to highlight the challenges faced by homeless youth. So they were thinking about the power of the media, dominant media, to set narratives around young people and homelessness, and they wanted to disrupt that. So they actually did develop skills in planning, writing, typesetting, and producing the magazine, supporting each other in the process. They're very excited about the project. Their magazine received recognition and support from the local community, including a grant from the local steelworks. And
can I just say something there? Sorry, Michelle. This was actually because members of the public, after reading the magazine, they distribute them a bit at the shopping centre and to other homeless young people on the street. And that was members of the public, a few of them, who nominated them for a civic award in this town, which was really nice, yeah. And the organisation was very pleased about that. So it was a refuge. Sorry, Michelle, keep going.
No, that's right, exactly right. They see the power of the change when these young people were taking a leading role in changing the narratives of their stories. So as Fran said, they were honoured publicly when members of the public nominated them. And with the support from the youth worker, the project helped young people envisage and pursue new futures. So some individual successes there, with one young woman taking up vocation real estate course, and another felt confident to enrol in university, and a third joined a graphic design course after working on the magazine. So futures that they hadn't thought of before, suddenly other opportunities are open to them. And another member designed a new magazine and collaborated with a group to create a magazine for young pregnant mothers. So really taking control of their own narrative in the ways in which they chose to address that marginalisation.
When it came to getting their award, so what we did was we asked the youth workers in each of these cases to act as a resource, and we gave them money from the grant to resource the young people to get whatever they needed to support their project. And one of the things that happened here, which I think was more significant to the young people than it might sound, they didn't have clothes to wear that they thought was appropriate to get their award, and they got really worried about that. So we actually used some of our grant money so that they could go out and buy clothes that they felt good about turning up and actually being with other people in the community, because they thought they'd be looked down on, and they didn't feel like they had anything, respectable and so on. And they really enjoyed that, and that really gave them a little boost. And it was interesting that again, the community got behind them. We had our challenges though. Early on, the host organisation, which was a very well-respected youth refuge in this metropolitan town, they wanted us to take more control over the young people and the project. And they actually explicitly stated that. They said the young people were noisy, and they could, they were taking up too much room in the common room or whatever. And so we were able to negotiate that with them. They were actually open to negotiation. We talked with them, the young people talked with them, and they were impressed by that. But there are a few things, like the young people arranged an interview with a local football star, and they were really thrilled that they'd done this. They took initiative to do this. But the host organisation was unhappy. They wanted to take this over. They actually said to the young people this was too big a thing, that they should be doing it. They should have arranged it, and it should have gone through the organisation. And there was a sense there that maybe somehow by the young people doing it, their reputation would be diminished in some way. And this was a big thing in this organisation. It was about, we've got good standing in this community and we need to keep it, But they were also open to discussion. They were good with the young people ultimately. They certainly wanted to vet the Young People's Magazine before it was published, and this became a huge issue because the young people became quite angry, and they said they don't trust us, and so this was discussed, and we eventually settled on a kind of compromise where they just looked at the key sections. But you know what? They were surprised at how good it was. They said, this magazine is terrific. And that actually meant that the youth, the young people had shown that they were very trustworthy in what they did. One girl, the one who went on to university, actually, she wrote about her mother being a drug addict. And we asked her about that and to check with her mum whether that would be okay. And her mum was really happy about it. You know, that the girl was actually exploring what this meant for her, and so the mum was surprisingly supportive. Yeah, so ultimately, the young people were able to maintain control over their project. The young woman who was pregnant, she really didn't want to let go of this group at the end of the group, and so she wanted to run another magazine, and we weren't able to give her any money for that. By that time, we'd spent all our money. And I'm not sure what happened there, but she at least was nested within this refuge. So, and that's the story there. We figured by this time we'd be running out of time, so we didn't want to. We've done that one pretty quickly. But just a general group discussion summing up. One of the things that we found, which surprised us, was first of all that neoliberalism is dominant, but it's not absolutely uniform. There are little pockets. There are times when organisations like the last one are open to negotiation and discussion and change and listening to the young people. Perhaps surprisingly to Nai was that a government department showed the most flexibility in supporting the young people's projects. They were right on board. This was the first project with the Indigenous young men. They welcomed non-traditional projects. They welcomed their innovative ideas. And we think, and you would have ideas about this too, that government departments, while they're also pressured to adopt neoliberal practices, Michelle, can we go back to the last slide? Because we just have a few questions there. They didn't have as much funding anxiety as NGOs. And so they felt they could better accommodate, I think, the possibility of failure and innovative practice, experimenting with innovative practices. So we wanted to ask you what you would identify as effective collaborative practice in youth work. Like, how do we identify that? And what examples have you been involved with where this has worked? Or what examples have you found inspiring of collaborative work, even if you haven't been directly involved? Where has it worked for you? And Michelle, you might have other questions there too. This is appearing a bit sad, everyone. the limited or no effective practices.
I suppose I can jump in. I'm not sure what the broader group, what your experience with Headspace is, but part of our auditing requirements is to have a youth reference group. So I work in youth education and engagement, and so one of my key roles is to oversee the operation of this youth reference group. There isn't necessarily a requirement for this youth reference group to take on social advocacy roles, but it's certainly something that I encourage, especially in the mental health sphere. So I think in terms of critical practices, it's nothing that this group isn't aware of. It's making sure that it's youth-centered, that the ideas come from them, and that we serve as a facilitator to help guide them to achieve those goals. One piece of work that I'm really inspired by that they're working towards is actually very similar to the magazine that the young homeless people were creating, is that we are creating a magazine that we call the Life Hack Pack. It'll be a magazine that we will distribute at the end of the year to graduating students, but also other disengaged youth that are potentially doing like school alternative programs, but even just other services, and we'll have it in-house. And part of this life hack pack are things like mental health self-care and those sorts of coping strategies and mechanisms. We'll also have budgeting tips, cheap and easy recipes, with like some core food groups. So like, how many meals can you make from a bag of oats? How many meals can you make from pasta, rice, those sorts of dishes? It'll also include like a document checklist. So a lot of our young people are leaving home quite prematurely. They're not prepared for the big wide world. So we've created a bit of a checklist of the documents that you have. So some of our youth reference group didn't know how to enroll to vote, or how to apply for Centrelink payments, how to apply for their own bank account, getting phone plans when you don't have any credit history, those sorts of things. So yeah, I'm pretty inspired by our young people and what we're working towards, and I think it's a really cool resource.
That's fantastic, Cherry. And it reminds me that the young people in this group also put in a few recipes and top tips. And I think they made up a kind of like, Wordle type kind of thing as well. And yeah, Cherry, how is the reference group chosen? How does that work?
So there's a couple of different methods. I personally, because it depends centre to centre, because of course we're underneath that tender structure. So every Headspace centre is different. For us, it's an application process. So young people either that come in as clients, so they can come in to see one of our clinicians, and they might have some sort of desire for social advocacy, and our clinicians will recommend them to join the youth crew. We often have young people inquiring about how they can volunteer for Headspace to get references for university applications or job applications. So they're just looking to volunteer. And I also am starting a recruitment campaign that I'm going to be talking to a lot of the legal studies teachers in the area and going out to the universities and stuff like that, campaigning for our youth reference group to be social advocates.
Fantastic. And so in that way, you're getting kids with real lived experience of the issues.
Yeah, absolutely. I think recruiting through lived experience, recruiting through our clinical process, I think is probably one of the most important recruitment processes, is making sure that these are young people that well-being and mental health of their peers is a priority as well as themselves.
Yeah, thanks. It's great.
I think I'd say we have an ongoing project at Sisters Inside called Art Group, where we get young Indigenous women come to Art Group on every Wednesday evening. Now, that's facilitated by the manager of youth programs here at Sisters Inside, Netori Marbo. There's also a co-facilitator in this process, but couldn't come today because she had a management meeting to go to. That Art Group's been running for about 5 or 6, it's been running for over 8 years. I started 8 years ago and it was running then. The year before I started, they had a trip up to Lady Musgrave Island on the Barrier Reef, and an art auction of their artwork paid for that trip for 6 young people and 2 youth workers. So we have an auction every year at the end of the year, or if we have a conference and we have the auction at the conference. Young people direct the art, they direct it all. The money that gets raised, the young people can take the money for their paintings, or they can pool it to go away on trips. We're saving, after the last couple of auctions, we're saving for a trip to Uluru, for our art group to go to Uluru. The young girls run it. If they don't want to do art for the night, they don't do art. They'll get a feed, might just be sitting talking. We've just bought a new TV to go get set up in the art room to maybe watch some documentaries while art's on. It's just great, and it's been, like I say, it's been going for over 8 years, and the young women run it. It's their group. Netori facilitates, and she's an artist in her own right. So she's got a degree in fine art, so she knows art, and Their paintings go, we have our auctions, and Debbie, the boss of Sisters Inside, she'll organise for all these lefty lawyers to show up. Well, you know, when you see a piece of artwork that's that square, sold for $450, you watch a young woman who painted it, watch her jaw nearly hit the ground, and then you see that change come over them. And we've had a young woman go on and start a fine arts degree at university through the encouragement of doing art group for about 6 years. So again, a very positive project that works really well. And it engages young women and stays engaged. And that's the beauty of Sisters Inside. We've got a 22-year-old coming to art group on Wednesday nights. She's been coming to art group since she was 12. We've stayed engaged with her the whole time. Sometimes she'll drop out and she might have gone off and committed some crime, but she'll come back. Her life is looking really good now. And that ongoing consistent support through the teenage years is what works. And it all support all our teenagers all throughout their teenage years. The world will be a different place. Unfortunately, funding doesn't permit that. But Sisters Inside it does. So yeah, it's really good.
People fall through the cracks. That's great, Phil. Thank you. One of the ways we looked at this was through the lens of Nancy Fraser's framework for social justice. To what extent has this project progressed social justice for the young people involved? And she's got 3 key principles here. One is, has it increased their access to resources? And in 2 of the cases, it did do that. The second, and resources don't just include, you know, finance. It's resources to being able to connect with education, to being able to connect with health services, and so on. The second thing she talks about is identity. She calls it misrecognition, but is there greater recognition for who these young people, you know, for who they really are? And we certainly saw that, getting rid of the stereotypes, getting rid of the stigma. We saw that particularly in the first project, but also in the last one that we just discussed as well. And her third point is that, and this she always argues is most important, is participatory parity, is the right for everybody to be on an equal footing in a relationship and to be able to participate in their own lives on an equal footing with anyone else. And she would argue that this is the most important because it can actually help bring about changes in the other 2. So these are all interconnected. And what we argued here was that in 2 of the projects, these conditions were met for progressing social justice, and obviously in the art project, imposed art project, they weren't. Yeah. So just to basically explain a bit about the framework there, and how you can use something like that as a bit of a model, a heuristic device, as we labelled it, to think about, is this really progressing social justice? So Nancy Fraser is, as you probably know, a scholar, feminist, social change person of world renown. She's written lots and lots in this. I can see Jen nodding her head there. Yeah, about this. It's well established framework.
Yes, I've quoted Nancy Fraser numbers of times and yes, taught her work. Yeah,
she's good, Jan, isn't she? I teach it to social work students in the hope that they'll all become advocates out there.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, you know, one of the really important things really is about who has the right of veto, isn't it? You know, and that's, you know, part of the challenges that you talked about in the other ones, but just that then, you know, you are truly engaging in participatory work and thinking about social justice if young people have the right, hold on to the right of veto, you know, and there isn't someone, an adult person overruling them. And that's, you know, I've found is the hardest thing for organisations to let go of, is the right of veto, because then it's about letting go of some of their power and trusting young people and trusting the process and all of that. And that's just terrifying from a neoliberal perspective, managerial perspective. But for young people, that's the end game. You know, when they realise that they have the right of veto, then they're all in.
Yeah, yeah.
Like they know it's real, and they're all in. You know,
that's a very insightful way to put it, Jen. I couldn't agree more. It's control, isn't it? Relinquishing control, and adults find that hard to do with young people.
Yeah.
A couple of things comes to my mind. One was in terms of what success is, was that there was an organization that was commissioned by Queensland Health to produce a booklet around harms of methamphetamines or amphetamines, about speed. And they engaged with a number of speed users in Brisbane, and they produced this booklet that was called Goi de Goanna. Some of you might remember that. And they had to, because it was funded through Queensland Health, they had to submit it there. So similar to what happened in that magazine thing, Queensland Health freaked out and said, no way you're going to put this out. So the organization stayed true to the people who they had engaged with and released it without the Queensland Health's logo or any association with them. It went on to its 10th edition. It was one of the most successful educational resources. And at that stage, Queensland Health came begging them to actually put their logo on the booklet and funded subsequent releases. So that was a really good thing to see organizations standing their ground of what is actually should be done. The other thing that I wanted to say was...
Fantastic. What a great example. I hadn't heard about that before.
Yeah. The other one that I guess I wanted to mention was, I guess, when I was a young person and I was into sort of activism and stuff, and we saw adults in a way as gods, and they didn't shy away from acting as gods, and they would tell us definitively what was needed to be done and what should the world look like. And I guess reflecting on that, I realized how dangerous that was, because these were people who actually weren't critical thinkers themselves, just used their age and that adultism in terms of them pushing power. And so we were doing stuff that later on I realized that were probably not the best things to do. And so I guess what I like doing, and now how I engage with young people, is similar to your process, a bit of a participatory action research. So it's not having any agenda or any attachment or any sort of outcomes in mind or trying to push anything, but more about inquiry, is about young people, can I find young people as co-activists who come on board an inquiry, and then together we inquire about what is the best way to achieve something, and open to be challenged and open to learn in the process. And I think that's sort of a collective approach to learning and growing is probably one of the ways that we can deal with challenging neoliberalism or a lot of the isms, really. Almost entire ism phenomenon.
True.
Vash, I definitely, that resonates with me, because Fran knows, in our community and social activism subject, we get the students to design and implement and carry out their own activist projects. And management does everything they can to keep control of that. It's, by making them submit a proposal and me having to sign that off, that they're not going to risk the reputation of the university. That's their goal, not educating social workers to be activists. which should be their goal.
Mm. Mm.
And we just have to stand in the way of that.
Yeah.
Michelle's done a great job of that. There was a lot of pressure put on Michelle. A small group of students did a blood on their hands thing. They filled the soap containers with red dye, Michelle, and put up, you know, posters, and poor staff person wasn't expecting this and went to wash her hands and, you know, got this red and got really distressed and reported this. And it was about not testing products on animals that the young people were really, really concerned about. And Michelle was put under enormous pressure and she stood firm. We're lucky that in social work, one of our, you know, as Jen would know, our core values and in our code of ethics is social advocacy and activism. And so we could refer to that. But and every year now, poor Michelle is still put under a lot of pressure, all stemming from that initial project. But Michelle, you can just quickly tell the end of that story because it had a nice kind of outcome in terms of.
Well, in terms of that staff member, she actually ended up being one of our key lecturers in the family violence unit. And she was recently elected into local government, you know, because the shock for her was that she had experienced domestic violence. So but the security guards challenged the project because they said we had unauthorized access to the soap containers. We actually thought was
found very funny. Our whole work group burst out laughing when we got this note about the students having unauthorized access to the soap containers.
Yeah, so and of course we apologized to that person, and actually she ended up becoming one of our collaborators, and the young people went on to just challenge that idea, and they were proud of that. So. So things don't, I mean, and we also encourage our students to do their activism on campus as a safe place to actually explore this. They're only learners. They're only doing it for 12 weeks. And the expectation of management was that, well, you know, they deemed that project as irrelevant because, you know, that's so, how did they know that, how did the students know whether that soap was tested? Really completely misunderstanding the ideas and the values behind that project. And
they actually saw it as a stunt.
Yeah, yeah.
Rather than as a serious.
As if they were deviant. Yeah, that's right. Really, so really misunderstanding the idea. They weren't critical thinkers.
And it amazes me how good Michelle is at withstanding pressure and not answering the dean's emails and so on. It's pretty incredible at that.
That's great role modeling too in itself. Fantastic. We're coming towards the midday end of our session. Is there any other comments? Anybody wanted any questions, comments to Michel and Fran from the group?
Stop sharing. It's been a delight to speak with all of you today.
It's been so good having you both, Fran and Michel. It's a fascinating topic that you chose for your research, your methodology, and the way you went, the process you adopted. That thing about, like, you know, going through a trusted youth worker. So many times the researchers miss that point and they decide we will engage ourselves because that's more authentic, and go through that failure. And yeah, great learnings from your, and even like, you know, you were saying one of the projects was success, the other one was failure. Even the fact that that failure, the learnings from that was documented and you've shared, it's such a resource for us and for everybody else interested in this. So thank you so much, and giving your time too. So I know you're very busy people, and so generously coming on board and helping us with this.
Well, thank you. I think we're pretty thrilled when, people want to actually find out about our work, and what we do can be actually used in real life on the ground by people. And we aim to contribute, I think, to social change for young people in a serious way. And it's via these kinds of forums that we can do that best. Not everybody's going to go out and read an academic article. So we were thrilled to be asked. Thank you. And thanks for reading the article, Siavash. Be one of our 2 readers.
Sherry's written.
With the project that failed, I'm assuming it's a community organisation with a management committee. Did they get it? Did they get why it failed? Did you get the opportunity to explain to them why it failed?
Oh, we did, Phil. We did. But no, they didn't really get it. I think they were overwhelmed with anxiety about getting refunded. And they had thought, art had been effective before, so therefore we do art.
Yeah, that's sad, isn't it?
It is sad, yeah. But the refuge was much more open. They were anxious, but they were able to go along with it ultimately. Yeah, and that was positive.
Jane, you were going to read Cherie's.
Yeah, just knowing that Cherie doesn't have access to a microphone. They've written, this has been very eye-opening in relation to the neoliberalism that's present in organisations. We're very blessed to work in our organisations that is youth-led and strengths-based. We have the ability to walk alongside the youth where they're at. Our programs are youth-led and adapted to their current desires and concern. Our community has excellent community engagement and connection. I had no idea this wasn't the gold standard in practice. In reflection, I do see a lot of that. I can't read, I need my glass. Oh, ticking the boxes and reduction in connection with youth who are in the too hard basket. I appreciate this content and learning. Thank you. Yeah, in the school system. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? When you work for a good organisation, you just think that every organisation's like that, and that's what youth work is. And then you get out into another version of the world, and it's like, oh shit, okay, that's what it's like, for people. And yeah, it's there's a lot of hard work that still needs to be done.
It's great to hear from Sherry that there are places around like that, though, still in this environment. And that would be, again, a government organisation, I imagine. Is that right?
I don't think it's the government. I think
No, that's an NGO.
Not for profit. Yeah, no.
Not for profit. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Really impressive. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Okay, well, thank you again, Michel, Fran, Jen, Phil, as co-facilitators, and all of you participants in this community. It's been delightful having you again. We will obviously put this video up, and we get another session which is really building on this one on 6th of August, which is once again we're revisiting the notion of critical youth work, which is basically, as I said, continuing this discussion of what is critical youth work, what is it that we need to think, well, how do we practice this, how do we bring that focus to our daily work, and not become victims of this, market-driven agenda of commodifying every aspect of our life, including our precious youth work. So please join us on the 6th of August if you can, at the same time, 10 o'clock, and I'll send out more information about that. And thank you again, and have a great day, everyone. See you around.
Thank you, Siavash.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, Fran and Michelle. Really appreciate your
thank
work.
you so much.
Thanks.
It's really important work.